This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Mr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
There we are. Thank you.
Well, we've had conversations on many issues and many subjects, and one we seem to go back to many times is the division of power in the United States government. And so one of the issues of consequence that has happened recently is a federal district judge in Texas had put an injunction out to stop the plan of President Obama to basically change the U.S. immigration policy. And this is rather a big thing that's occurred here. Do you want to opine on any of the nature of this event and how things are going?
Well, it's something that's not entirely unexpected, because with the whole idea of the judiciary, which Abraham Lincoln, what am I saying, Alexander Hamilton once called the least dangerous branch, it tends to politicize everything, and de Tocqueville noticed this as well, that all big political issues ultimately become judicial issues, because if there's a minority, if somebody believes that its rights have been slighted, it's a fairly easy thing to go to the courts and try to make an argument that this is unconstitutional, that what the other players have done, the president or Congress have done, is unconstitutional, and then the judicial branch can put a stop to it, can at least put the brakes on it temporarily. So with well over 100 federal courts, it's only to be expected that something like this would have happened. So it's not at all surprising. I think the person who's most surprised may be President Obama himself.
Well, just to discuss this, I mean, you mentioned the different venues that are possible. There are many federal district courts out there. Can people shop venues, so to speak? And I noticed this particular case was filed in Texas to a judge that had been a Bush appointee. Yes. So presumably he would at least be tilted toward conservative viewpoints, but maybe not. But one would suppose that that knowledgeable people might try and do something like this. Any comments?
Yes, and there is some truth to that. It's the forum shopping issue. And we pay so much attention to Supreme Court appointments. When you get a justice on the Supreme Court retiring and replacement there, you get a lot of attention paid to that. And it's not quite as newsworthy to consider that there are, the last time I checked, well over 100 lower judges, and these are being appointed all the time, and they are the ones who are carrying the brunt of the work. Only a few hundred cases get to the Supreme Court. So it's quite easy for a president to have an ideological impact on lower courts. I would not at all be surprised that someone deliberately chose this court hoping he would get Hannon because he'd have a friendly response, and not a corrupt one, not anything that's wrong or unethical, but someone with a judicial outlook and a judicial philosophy that would work well in a situation like this for somebody trying to stop the executive order.
Now, apparently what happened was an injunction was ordered by the judge. That just stopped. If you can explain how that works to our audience. There are many lay people out there, I would imagine, not so many attorneys. Yes. But so what exactly is an injunction?
Okay. Well, an injunction is generally taken as putting the brakes on something, telling somebody or someone, whether he be a government official or a private individual, to stop doing something or not to do something. And in very broad general terms, it will differ from case to case, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But to get an injunction or a preliminary injunction like this, you have to do two things if you're the plaintiff. Number one, you have to show that if the injunction is not issued, that there is a danger of irreparable injury, something that can't really be addressed by damages or undone easily. And then the second thing you have to do is to show a likelihood of success on the merits. That when you go to trial later, when you examine this thing a little more fully, that the trial judge thinks that there's a good chance that you will win it. And if you get that, then the judge can step in ahead of time and say, all right, let's hold off on this until we get a more complete ruling from a higher court or a trial or something like that.
Now this is, when these clashes between the different branches of government occur, the resolution is generally not a jury trial, is it? I mean, the judiciary, so when you discuss what's going to happen next, it's going to the Court of Appeals, is it not? Is
Yes,
that the way this thing is going to work?
The next step would probably be the Court of Appeals, either a panel or in a bank, which the entire court would hear. And then there's always the possibility that it would go to the Supreme Court after that.
But it probably would it not?
Yes.
An issue of this consequence?
It's hard to tell. The courts have tended to be very deferential with regard to presidential action. The president, of course, is charged with faithfully executing the law, but the court is usually not going to second guess him on the value judgments he makes as to where to put his resources or that sort of thing. Now, in this case, Congress has clearly said this is the law, and the president has pretty clearly said, I'm not going to enforce it. So does that go beyond the executive's powers here? I think there's a good argument that it does. So the Supreme Court may want to weigh in on this.
Well, is it, I mean, to resolve issues of national consequence, I mean, doesn't that pretty much fall in the purview of the Supreme Court? I mean, presumably, this is an enormous issue for the Republic, as they say. And I think, if I can remember this, 26 states are sort of supporting this, stopping the president from doing this. And a lesser number, but still a substantial number of states, out of 12 or 14, are supporting the president's action.
Yes.
And this really, it pretty much goes to whatever political party seems to be dominant in the state.
Right.
So the
right.
Republican Party seems to be resisting this change in immigration policy, while the Democratic Party is supporting it.
Yes.
And is, just to continue a little bit more on the subject, I mean, this is a very substantial national question. And if presumably any president could do anything they want, the next time there might be a Republican president, and he could presumably say, well, I'm rescinding all of this earlier arrangement, and now I'm happy you've come forward to identify yourself, and I'm going to throw you out of the country now, since I've got your name and your telephone number, and you've come
Yes.
out of the shadows.
Yes.
And there would be nothing, presumably, if the Supreme Court did not act at this point, and the tables turned, it would be quite difficult to step up to the plate under the next administration. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. And this is why John Adams said a government of laws and not of men. And an executive order is perilously close to being the opposite, that a president can arbitrarily repeal or revoke or change the executive order of a predecessor without any due process whatsoever. And that's a dangerous thing. So why would you support an executive order? Well, probably because of bird in the hand. Well, we will worry about the next president later on when the time comes. Maybe he or she will be Democrat and not change it,
Yes.
and there's no problem. But since the Supreme Court is a place where a minority can step in and interfere with the process, it's really no good argument to say, well, most of the states, 26 out of 50, are opposing the executive order, because the courts are not really big on counting noses. They're going to look at the Constitution and not look at what most people want. That's not really their function. Now, sometimes they do, as it has been said, the Supreme Court follows the election returns, but that's no guarantee. And it's just hard to tell what's going to happen here. Well, we're just going to have to wait and see. And of course, the Supreme Court itself is ideologically split, even if we do get that far.
Well, it's a rather difficult issue, isn't it? One thing that sort of troubles me, I guess I would say, is the fact that we have this enormous, centrifugal forces in the country, and we have one sort of group of people that are identifying themselves as Democrat and another as Republicans, and a lot of this identification is based on ethnicity.
Yes.
And it's a rather complicated kind of thing, isn't it? I mean, so it's if you have one particular ethnic group that's in one party and one in another, that sets the stage for substantial tensions, national tensions down the line.
Yes.
It's a little
yes.
troublesome to me. Yeah.
Yes, and There are some conservatives on the right who make no bones about the fact, and I'm thinking Ann Coulter here, who has said, and she traces all of this back to Ted Kennedy when he really pushed for changing immigration laws in the 60s. And her snide comment, which is not entirely without truth, but it is a bit over the top, I think, is that the Democrats could not change the mind of the electorate, so they changed the electorate's demographic by relaxing immigration, because immigrants tend to go Democrat, at least for the first generation or two.
Well, not always, but you know,
yes.
we have the Cuban, well, that's right, it's
Tendency.
complicated, but in general, people coming in would be sort of, not always, but dependent on government largesse. They would be trying to start a new life, and the open doors the Democrats might open for them would be, they would imagine they would get a better shot at not for everyone, but many would.
Yes.
Say, well, that's one of the things I think it's worth reflecting upon is the changing demographic nature of the country and the tensions that might be causing. We have traditionally the idea of a melting pot where we can all sort of become an amalgam of everyone will sort of come together and be one people. But the idea that now that we have so many people with dual citizenships and different sort of secondary identities, national identities, that I don't know if the forefathers foresaw that.
Well, I doubt they did, and you of course did have multiculturalism even in the time of American colonialism, the American colonies and the founding era. You had German populations, you had the black population, especially in the South. But generally speaking, the movers and shakers were what a later generation would call white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So you had a fair amount of cohesiveness there. And of course, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants are very rapidly shrinking demographically, relatively speaking. And if you look at some of the great world movements, who wins, who loses, a lot of times it's not decided on the battlefield. It's not decided by big wars. It's decided in the bedroom. Who breeds more than others?
In the boudoir. Well,
yes,
I mean,
exactly.
many.
So,
I think we could say that's often an issue of consequence in the world.
yes.
Well, I mean, just to expand the comment, one of the things that goes on around the world is that if you look at the world population of European descent, it's diminishing. It's questionable about the Christian numbers in the world, but we have at least major Islamic population increases, lots of different changes in the demographic, construction of not only the country but the world.
Yes.
It's sort of what the point I sort of wanted to make on this was that if you came in the 1700s to the United States, and for instance, you were a German, you came from the Rhine Valley, it was tremendously difficult to get here. Several months, there were and then if one went inland, one discovered it was just, you were in this Arcadian wilderness, your life was just there, and the circumstances just made continuing with your national identity very difficult.
Yes.
Nowadays, it's possible to maintain a national identity in another place. The internet exists. It's relatively easy to travel, communications back and forth. And the United States, as far as I can tell, does not really require for the new citizens coming in to surrender their citizenship. So one of the things going on with the U.S. immigration policy is presumably a number of people that came to the country illegally are going to be, and through a complicated process, allowed to stay. Their children stay. We hope they'll integrate into the country, but they can keep their earlier citizenship and their connection outside the country, which to me, it's a complicated story, but I wonder if it doesn't cause a major change in our national character.
Yes.
The identity of an American as somebody
yes.
just committed to one kind of culture.
Yes. Well, it's the modern technology. If you do come here in 1750 from England or from one of the German states or anywhere else in Europe, that's essentially a clean break. You're probably never going to see your family members there again. You may write them a letter now and then, maybe not. Today, if you come here from Mexico or someplace slightly south of Mexico, there's cell phone coverage, there's highway, you can get back there easily, you can send money back there easily. So you can maintain these connections. And I think that's what we're saying is you have the potential to water down the recent immigrants' commitment to what we would call the American civil religion, the socialization aspect. And that's the interesting thing. That's what dissolves the borders more than anything else, I believe.
And if you want the borders to stay there,
Yes.
I mean, maybe
Perhaps
some
you don't,
people,
yes.
maybe some people would say, well, we don't want borders
Yes.
anymore. We'd like to have sort of a great, I guess, North American, South American confederation, a new national arrangement.
Yes.
But maintaining our earlier arrangement, I think that's going to require some kind of national cohesion.
Yes.
And if the illegal immigration continues unabated, and there's a porous border with on one side of the border people in tremendous economic distress, not enough jobs, not enough work, very dangerous place to live, a lot of crime, and on the other side of the border, presumably in the U.S., it's turned into kind of a social democracy with tremendous income transference.
Yes.
So suddenly your whole family is here, and when you come here, you can continue pretty much speaking your native language, having your native culture. Not always, but and there are tensions to trying to learn English, and obviously people do. But nevertheless, it's possible to have a much better life here. And when you come, it's also possible to vote. And the Democrats presumably are what their party leaders are aware of who these people are going to vote for, which party they would vote for.
Yes,
Any
yes.
comments on that?
Well, I would like to digress for just a moment on the similar subject. But you perhaps know immigrants who came here to legally and work to get their green cards. I certainly do.
Yes.
And part of me thinks about the inherent unfairness of, I know a family that the husband provider had to work very hard and was on tenterhooks wondering whether or not he was going to be eligible for the green card. And the day he got that card, he was so proud. He was running around showing everybody.
Of course, yes.
Are we not being unfair to him by just a sweeping amnesty? And maybe it depends on national origin. If you are from Latin America and you can get here over land, over an unpoliced border, and then be given amnesty, how does that compare to somebody coming in from India or China over, through an airline which is much more tightly policed and have to jump through all the hoops? I will say one thing, that it's my belief, and it's certainly my hope in all cases, and my belief in a lot of cases, that in one way that these illegal immigrants are being true to the ideal of America, whatever that is, and that when they come here, they are willing to work extremely hard.
And obviously, as far as anyone would say, that's certainly the case.
Yes, and in that sense, they are more Americans even than those of us who are already here. But it's the socialization aspect. What do we still believe that is good about ourselves that sets us apart from other civilizations or other countries? The rule of law, the freedom to disagree, the freedom to publish satirical cartoons, for instance.
Yes.
Are these things endangered by this failure to socialize large groups of immigrants? And that may not happen in the short run, but give it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What are we doing to our birthright by running that danger?
So I guess one of the issues to discuss here is do the American people have the right to decide these questions, or does someone's rigor and just tremendous courage to cross the border to make it, that sort of trumps national policy.
Yes.
So the national policy cannot stand up to people that desperately want to cross the border.
Yes.
And I would say this, many people cross the border, the Rio Grande, but an equal number of people just overstay visas.
Yes.
So apparently one of the most common things to do is just to come from India and sort of, or wherever, one-way ticket, and then you just disappear into the crowd.
Yes.
And there are millions of people like that.
Yes, indeed.
And so in our present world, can we have national borders?
Yes.
Is it possible to actually, this is a rather important question, I think, is that we imagine that we have some kind of, you mentioned the word birthright, to be here in North America, and our kith and kin are going to determine which way the country goes. But from a transnational point of view, these transnational forces are trumping anything that we might try and decide one way or the other about it. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, and given the ease of transportation, as Manuel de Godoy said back when he transferred Louisiana to France, and then France immediately turned around and sold it to us, you can't lock up an open field. We have huge long borders. We're not a police state. I hope that we don't want to be a police state. So what do you do about it? So is there a birthright of Americans? You know, keeping in mind that most people here are immigrants, unless they are full-blooded Native American.
And even they were immigrants, Bucky.
Yes.
So shall we say, 30,000 years ago, only the buffalo really did roam here. There was no one here for
correct.
eons.
But they didn't dispossess anyone. So, you know, it raises an interesting question, and these are the most interesting legal questions. One that would seem to have been so obvious that no one even thought about it. And then conditions change, and we find ourselves having to ask this question, and our fundamental law doesn't really address it. Do citizens have some sort of additional privilege that in the ordinary course would be denied to others? And the Constitution never spoke to that. The Constitution never even defined what citizenship was until after the Civil War. So what do you do when somebody's saying, well, why should we treat a non-citizen differently from a citizen? And as a matter of fact, at the same time the Constitution defined citizenship, it also started requiring that states treat everyone, not just citizens, but all persons equally. So does that mean that the illegal immigrant is equally entitled to a free public education along with the citizen who has been here paying taxes and that sort of thing? So,
does the immigrant does he get income transference? In other words, the income tax arrangements are, if you're a working person and you can, basically you're entitled to some money from the government.
Social Security card.
Well, but people, if they work and they have a low enough income, they get an income transference. They just get, instead of paying taxes, they receive money.
Yes.
And so one of the things going on are people that have come here illegally, and assuming the regulations go through, they're going to be entitled to a check from the government, even though, which is a rather strange thing. But you know, having said that, I mean, we bring up to a very complicated issue about who's a citizen, who's not a citizen. And one group that we might talk about briefly are the Native Americans. I guess I said that correctly. The Native Americans.
The Indian peoples.
And you could say, right, well, they're not really from India, but okay. They're Native Americans, and do they have a special set of rights? Are they automatically, or American Indians automatically have the right to vote forever, or were they considered not part of the nation, and they have a separate nation? I mean, it's rather, or they have membership in both camps?
A little bit of both. It's always been, and even to this day, it's a complicated arrangement that in some ways they were seen as an independent sovereign state within a larger sovereign state, and in that regard they were treated very differently, but in other regards they were treated as American citizens. So for today, for instance, the Indian tribes and sometimes the various reservations will have their own federal courts. Those courts work the same way as other Article III courts, but they are specifically designated for that tribe or for that reservation. So we've still got a Bureau of Indian Affairs, I believe, the last time I checked. So it's life on the borders, quite literally. It was similar to the same problem as slavery. Here you have people, they are very clearly human beings, and yet they are human beings without the rights of personhood. We're recognized as being people, but not legal persons. But you read the Constitution, the Commerce Clause. Congress has the power to regulate commerce, foreign commerce with foreign states, and interstate commerce among the states. That would seem to cover everything, but then you see a third phrase that says, and with the Indian tribes. Well, does that mean the Indian tribes are not a foreign country and not a state? Well, what are they? So it's,
You know, I
it's
think
always
there
been
was
that
some
complicated.
confusion
Yes.
about how to handle that. It wasn't clear ever, really, for a long time. Maybe it's still not totally clear, but I think there were ideas about starting Indian states. People considered actually taking part of Georgia and turning it into an Indian state. I mean, so people considered that. Benjamin
yes.
Hawkins, of local fame here, that was one of the things he advocated. So we have this, I guess where I'm trying to take the ship is there are many gradations of citizenship. We have situation with people born in possessions, people that live in Guam, and particularly Puerto Rico.
Yes.
So you're it's sort of this nebulous arrangement. American passports are floating around everywhere. People that live in other countries are American citizens, and if you're born here, you have the right to maintain that American citizenship. I think one issue that's slightly amusing is the mayor of London. He's an old Etonian, quite a guy, I think.
He just renounced his U.S. citizenship recently.
Not before he paid taxes. Apparently, as I understand it, he's ambitious to become the Prime Minister of England. Being a dual citizen that's not too much of a hindrance. But he apparently sold his house in London and discovered out of the blue that he owed the U.S. government $40,000 on the transaction, as I understand this story. And he only grudgingly paid it because if he had not paid his taxes, then he would have been persona non grata.
Yes,
he would have been arrested or all kinds. So as the Prime Minister of England going back, or Britain, shall I say, the United Kingdom, going back and forth, if he traveled here, he'd get into all kinds of trouble. So I think he paid his taxes, and then I think after that, he renounced his citizenship.
So is that what it means to be an American citizen? You have to pay taxes? Is that what
I think that's a lot. I think that's a lot of it, Bucky.
Yes.
There are many people that live overseas that have American citizenship, and I think the government, as far as I understand it, doesn't care what you do. You can be the general in an opposing army. You can be president of another country, and maintain your American citizenship, but you have to pay taxes. That's the only sine qua non of being a citizen here. You have to pay American taxes. And if you don't, you get into a lot of trouble.
Well, that's quite an amazing thing. And if you recall reading *The Winds of War* and *War and Remembrance*, the fictitious General Armin von Roon, who actually gets to write some in that book, and he is being extremely critical, not just of the Soviets, but of the Americans. And he says that when the Germans lost, it means the world is going to be divided between American money bags and the Russian knout. And, and so we can be a citizen as long as you pay your money. It seems to bear out what von Roon was saying.
Another interesting thing is that if you try, and many people have said, well, I'll get a better tax deal somewhere else. Yes. Apparently, if the government requires you to disgorge tremendous amounts of money if you attempt to renounce your citizenship. So it's not an easy process. As I understand it, you have to pay big amounts of money to depart your.
It's something. So what's left of citizenship besides that? You hear horror stories about what is being taught in school, and I will say that ever since Vietnam, that American citizens, or at least in the academy, have adopted a very jaundiced view towards American motives and American actions in the world, and we have done some highly questionable and very unsavory things, but has that poisoned our entire curriculum? Are we doing away with American citizenship courses, American civics? Are we doing away with anything that we as a people can in common feel patriotic about? The public reading of the Declaration of Independence, for instance, the Pledge of Allegiance, something that allows one American citizen, or even one person who is committed to the ideal of America, like an illegal immigrant who has come here to better himself, something that allows him to recognize himself as and hold himself out as a member of the tribe. Are we doing away with all that, or are we just becoming a lost generation of extremely selfish people who look inward, who don't look to civic duty, who don't look to public virtue, who don't look to anything in America that would make us distinct, even fictitiously, from other states?
Maybe one of the things to consider is the rate by which immigration appears. In the 1920s, we had a pretty high, or before that, and
yes.
right around the teens. So the 1900s, 1910, 1920, pretty heavy immigrant populations.
Yes.
And after World War I, that
We
was
put the
slowed
brakes
up.
in, yes.
But the gesting populations sometimes things take a little time.
Yes.
And maybe that's one thing to brood about. So if we have legal immigration, that's sort of an adjustable number. I believe it's a substantial number, about 1 million people a year,
Yes.
1 million.
Yes.
So if the number is 10 million a year, that has over a long period of time, it's pretty corrosive impacts.
Yes.
And I think it's reasonable that the American people have some role in this process,
Yes.
that the president just doesn't arbitrarily do something, and then after this has happened, it's impossible to undo it.
Yes.
That'd be my thoughts.
And of course, he'll always justify what he has done, not with any legal argument, but just by saying it's the right thing to do.
Well, on that note, Bucky, we're going to have to end our conversation, but we'll
Indeed.
talk some more.
Right
So nice to talk to you tonight. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.